Hey guys, as always, thanks for the click. Today I'm going to engrave some plastic dice on the MIRA 7. I'm going to go from these white plain dice to these engraved dice with painted letters and symbols. This is going to be a step-by-step from the jig to the engraved to the painting. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get this project started. I hope you enjoy it. Let's go. I'm going to start off by making a jig to hold the 3 dice. I'm going to get my calipers and I'm going to measure the thickness of the die. When I place my calipers on the die, I want the die to fit freely on the jaws. And the measurement comes out to about 0.848 inches. So I'll go ahead and make it 0.85 inches. This will compensate for the kerf and the masking that will be on the die. So here's my idea for the jig. The jig will hold 3 dice. So I will go ahead and draw 3 squares that are 0.85 inches by 0.85 inches. And I will position these squares a ½ inch apart. These 3 squares will be centered on a jig, and the size of that jig will be 5 inches by 3 inches. Now here's the jig design in Lightburn. So I'll go ahead and send this job to the MIRA 7 laser and cut it out. The material used for this jig is 1/8 inch MDF. So let me place the jig on the workbench and check the dice for fit. Not too snug, but not too loose. Perfect. Okay, now that I have this jig cut out, I'm going to want to find the center point of this jig. So how am I going to find the center point of this jig if there's a square hole cut in the middle of it? Well, I'm going to make another jig exactly the same size as this jig, with a crosshair target that will show the center of this jig. Here is the crosshair jig in the Lightburn software. Let me send this job to the laser and cut it out of 1/8 inch MDF. Okay, now that I have this crosshair jig cut, let me take it to the workbench and see how it aligns with the dice jig. This will all make sense as we continue on. As I align the jigs back to back, you can see how the crosshair jig shows the exact center point of the dice jig. This will be very important when we load our engraved design to the laser, selecting center as our user origin. Well, the next question is, how am I going to align the dice jig to be square with the laser head? Well, you guessed it, I'm going to make another jig. Here is a 90-degree L-jig that I use in a lot of my projects. This 90-degree L-jig is 8 inches by 8 inches, and the legs are 1.5 inches wide. And you'll notice that I have score lines across the X and Y axis. This will be super helpful in squaring the L-jig to the laser pointer. I used to square my L-jig using the edges, but it's hard to see the exact location of the laser pointer. So that's why I made the score lines. So now I'm going to move the laser pointer onto the score line of the Y-axis by tapping the left, right, and back and forth arrows on the keypad. As you can notice, the jog speed of the laser head is too fast for me to pinpoint the location of the laser pointer on the score line. So let me go to the controller and change the jog speed of the laser head. I start by pressing the speed button on the controller. The default speed setting is set for 300 millimeters per second. I want to change that to 10 millimeters per second. Using the left and right arrow keys, I move the cursor to the tens place, and I change that to 1 by pressing the up arrow. Now I move the cursor to the hundreds place, and I change that number to 0 by pressing the down arrow. Doing this will now give me better control to move the laser pointer exactly where I want it. I now press enter to lock in my settings. Now when I tap the directional arrows on the keypad, you'll see the laser head move very slowly. This will help a lot to pinpoint your location. Now let's get back to moving the laser pointer onto the score line. And now it's going to be so much easier to make that happen. Once on the line, our mission is to align the jig so that the laser pointer stays on the line from the top to the bottom. So now I'm going to press the down arrow and move the pointer down the score line. As I move it to the bottom, you'll notice that the laser pointer has come off the line to the left. So I'll have to slightly adjust the position of the bottom of the L-jig and try again. Now moving the pointer in the upward direction. When the pointer reaches the top, it is now off the line a bit to the left. So I'll keep adjusting until the laser pointer stays on the line from top to bottom. After a few adjustments, the laser pointer stays on the line from top to bottom. This means that the L-jig is now square to the laser head. I will now move the laser head out of the way and lock down the Y-axis with some high-powered neodymium magnets. These magnets hold the jig strongly in place. And since the L-jig is 90 degrees, this means that the X-axis should be aligned as well. So let me go ahead and check the X-axis for alignment. And just as stated, the X-axis is perfectly aligned. So I'll move the laser head out of the way and lock down the X-axis with some more high-powered magnets. And it's always so nice to have my little helper Lucy by my side under her new favorite space under the MIRA 7. So now I'll place the dice jig onto the laser bed and flush it up to both sides of the L-jig. So knowing that I set the origin to center on all the dice engraved jobs that I will be sending to the laser, I will have to find the center of the dice jig in order for the engraved designs to line up. I know I can set the origin to the bottom right corner, but I've done the corner method in the past, and I've found it difficult to pinpoint the corner with the laser pointer, because the pointer falls off the edge and you really never truly know where you're at. That's why I decided to give the center crosshair jig a try. I'll be better able to see the laser pointer and position it on the bullseye. So let's move the laser pointer to the crosshair mark. And I will pulse a laser shot just like I did when I aligned the mirrors, but this is a lot easier. Once I am satisfied that I'm on the spot, I'll close the lid and fire a laser pulse. Once again, I had to slow down the jog speed of the laser to 10 millimeters per second. This will make positioning the laser pointer onto the crosshairs a lot easier. I patiently move the laser pointer to the bullseye mark, making small corrections in both directions. I keep adjusting the position of the laser pointer until I'm sure it's on the mark. I think this is it. So I now close the door to the laser and I go to the control panel to press the pulse button to fire a test laser shot. After firing the test laser shot, I open the door to examine the target, and I quickly notice that the laser beam is off to the right of the bullseye, which means my laser pointer is not aligned to the laser beam. I will have to address that later, but for now I will have to compensate for that difference in distance. So now I will realign the pointer to the crosshairs, but now knowing that the laser pointer is off a bit to the left of the laser beam, I will compensate for that difference and position the laser pointer a little to the left of the bullseye. Once satisfied, I close the door to the laser to fire another test pulse laser shot. I now open the door to examine the target, and this time I was successful in hitting the center of the crosshair. Zooming in a bit, you can clearly see the second pulse shot hitting directly in the center of the crosshairs. And now when I unblock the laser pointer, you can clearly see that the laser pointer is not aligned with the laser beam. It is definitely off to the left. So now that I have found the center of this jig, I will quickly go to the control panel and lock in the origin for this job. And it's very important to write down the X and Y coordinates for this origin spot. You will want to use this origin spot for the rest of the engraved jobs. So now I'm going to load the dice jig design into the laser and press frame. You will see the laser pointer frame the job precisely around the frame of the jig. Now I'll load the actual dice jig and press the frame button, and the laser pointer perfectly frames this dice jig as well. I am now done with the alignment of this jig and I can start to engrave dice. So earlier I cut out some circle pieces of painter's tape that fit the sides of the die perfectly. So before engraving any die, I have to mask each side of the die with painter's tape. The painter's tape will help protect the top surface of the die. If I engrave without using the masking, the laser will scar the top surface of the die. So now that I am done masking each side of every die, I can now load the dice into the jig. Now that the dice are loaded into the jig, I will lower the laser bed and position the autofocus pin over the top of one of the dice. I now go to the controller and select autofocus and press enter. This will autofocus the laser to the material. So now I close the lid and I send the first engraved job to the MIRA 7. Notice that the job origin is set to center and all the cut processes have been turned off. The only job that the laser will process is the engraving of the letters on each die. So next I hit frame and then I hit start. Let's go ahead and get this job running. After each engraved job, I will open the door to the laser and flip each die to a different side. I will send each engraved job separately to the laser until all sides have been engraved. So let's just sit back and watch the MIRA 7 do its thing. Now that all the sides have been engraved, let's take the dice over to the workbench for inspection. A lot of dust is built up on these dice, so let's start off by removing the masking and getting a toothbrush to brush off the dust on all the surfaces, followed by blowing off each side with some compressed air. So now it's time to paint the engraved areas to make them pop. I decided to use acrylic paint for my dice. You can use paint pens or enamel paint. It's totally a user preference. So I get a small paintbrush and I begin to paint the engraved areas by pushing paint into every nook and cranny of the engraved areas. After I paint a few different colors onto a few more dice, I set them aside and I allow them to dry thoroughly. I then get a scrap piece of acrylic with a straight edge and I begin to scrape off the excess paint. It's so satisfying. So I repeat these steps until all the sides have been painted. So there you have it. This is how I engrave dice on my MIRA 7, from jigs to engraving to paint. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like and subscribe. So if it happens in my world or on the MIRA 7, I will surely make a video of it. So until next time, adios and have a blessed day.